complicated case. Woohoo! Let's go to everyone's very favorite case. Credit Bureau Enterprises versus Pelo. We're not talking about promissory estoppel. What are we talking about here? So there are these things called contracts in fact and contracts in law. We're going to get to learn what those are thanks to this case. So what are the facts of the case? Let's start with the facts. This guy gets hospitalized by the court. The court says, you have brain problem. Go to hospital. And when he's in the hospital basically forces him to sign to pay for the medical expenses. They force him to. They say they won't give him his stuff back. They say, you can't have, I think they had his clothes or something. They wouldn't let him have his stuff back without signing. You can't just do that, by the way. That's not okay. So then the question is, does he have to pay? So they're saying, the court basically open and out rejects, says, doesn't matter if he signed under duress, because that's not what forms the contract here. The contract was formed in law. Now, how is it formed in law? We'll get to that. So contracts can exist in the law, right? They don't require the assent of the parties. They rest on considerations of justice and unjust enrichment, right? So when you're forced by the government to do something, you still have to pay for that, basically, is what they're saying here. So you can't get something and not pay for it, right? You can't get something and not pay for it. He got a service, right? He was in mental duress, and the hospital took care of him. Now he's claiming, I wasn't in real mental duress because the hospital ended up letting me out, which is not how linear time works. Like, I don't really have, the court kind of says something similar. It's like, you were in duress. The court had said so. You're just out of duress now and not at the hospital anymore. But, so, yeah. Because he was impaired, he could not consent. And so the hospital had to act without his consent. Now we've got restatement section, so restatement of restitution, which is different than the restatement of contracts. You've got number 116, which ultimately boils down to, you can provide services to an injured person, an unconscious and incapable person, and then they still have to pay for that, right? So if I'm a doctor and I come to, and I find, I'm at the ER. I'm in the hospital where I'm supposed to be. And there's a guy in a chair at the hospital, and he's bleeding from his mouth, and he's unconscious. He's snoring, and he's shooting blood all over, because when you snore, you exhale a lot. But he's not waking up from all the blood in his mouth. I perform doctor on him. I fix his bleeding nose, or whatever it is that's making him spew blood out. And I say, all right, I'm a doctor. We charge $10 million for nosebleeds, assuming that is a reasonable price. Courts would say no, but let's say fine, $50. So it's actually a reasonable number. He says, okay, $50. You have to pay me $50. The guy, I was unconscious. I never agreed to that. Doesn't matter, because the restatement of restitution makes it pretty clear. You can help injured persons if you're acting unofficiously. What is officiously? What is unofficiously? Officiously basically means you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. If you're acting unofficiously, you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's what that boils down to. The phraseology is a little more complicated than that, but that's basically what it boils down to here. So because he was impaired and he could not consent, the hospital had to act without his consent. So a contract implied in law was what created here. It's not a contract. It's a legal fiction, but it is a contract. But it's not a contract. It's fake, but in reality there's a contract. Basically, it's a device for judges to create a contract-esque remedy in a case. It's an obligation imposed by the law that doesn't care about the ascensions of the party. And that's what happened here, right? A court told him, you're going to doctor. And the doctor said, we charge for doctoring. And the court says, okay, you charge for doctoring. And he has to pay for that. Now, of course, there's no law that says the government's going to pay. And since there's no law that says the government's going to pay, he has to pay. It's pretty simple. Somebody has to pay, right? Now, if there was a law that said the government will pay for private hospital bills if you are forced to go to the hospital by the government, that's different. But there is no law in this case, right? That's why they have to go to him, sue him, instead of sue government. So, what is a contract implied in fact? It's an agreement that meets the requirement of a contract but is implied, often established by action rather than words or writing. Princess cruises. So, contract in fact, hey, you guys acted like there was a contract. That's a contract. Contract in law. The law has imposed obligations on you. You need to fulfill those obligations. Contract in law. That's also called a quasi-contract because lawyers, even if we're going to use ridiculous terminology, we're also going to have multiple words for the same thing, right? Because we don't like you. So, and I believe that's pretty much it. All right. Thank you guys very much. That one was a little more coherent than the last one. Good job.